We're Nick Lombardino and Zach Blumenfeld, co-founders of CultureCon. Welcome to a special series on the CultureCon podcast, Culture Starts Here.
This content series is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Advisa, a Midwest-based consultancy helping CEOs, HR leaders, and managers transform workplace culture.
In each episode, Advisa CEO Heather Haas and leadership consultant BJ McKay dive into practical ways to initiate and sustain the culture you need to drive growth and success at your organization.
The Culture Starts Here series starts now.
Welcome to the CultureCon Podcast. Today we're kicking off a new series called Culture Starts Here, brought to you in partnership with our friends at Advisa.
We're excited to introduce the two voices you'll hear throughout the series. BJ McKay, a leadership consultant who will be your guide for the journey ahead, and Heather Haas, Advisa's CEO and our resident expert on culture.
This kickoff is all about setting the foundation. So why culture matters, what Atlas is, which you'll learn a little bit more about throughout the duration of this episode, and how you can start applying it in your own organization. But before we go too far into it, we want to start with introductions from our podcast hosts. So Heather and BJ, tell us a little bit about your background, your roles at Advisa, and why organizational culture is important to you.
Yeah, so Heather Haas, and my background is, interestingly, as a classroom teacher and assistant principal of an elementary school. So I have roots in teaching and learning. And I think that serves me really well today because everything that we're about at Advisa is helping leaders and managers develop their skills and create environments where people love to work. So it's been an amazing ride. I've been with Advisa for over 21 years and had 7 years started off in the education realm. So I've been doing this work for a long time of helping people learn and grow and reach their potential.
And BJ McKay here. If you don't tell the voice difference between Heather and I, this is what it'll sound like. I come also in an interesting place. I was a college track and field coach, and that's literally where it came up. And I coach pole vault. So if anyone asks any questions about that throughout, I have deep expertise in that. But I came to culture through all of those different areas, just seeing myself as coach and watching what makes a winning team, what makes a losing team. Took that through media, took that through software, and then Heather found me and I found her. And I've been here for 15 years, kind of growing up, learning, and engaged in organizations as small as 5 or 6 person like startup organizations, all the way to Fortune 100 organizations, where we're mapping back all the way down to the kind of plumbing of an organization of what makes it win at different levels and what makes it toxic, and unpacking that with leaders who are all really best intentioned. And that's been the last 15 years of my career here.
Awesome. Well, we're both super grateful to have you on board as a partner and one of our kind of founding sponsors of this mini series, and just really grateful for the partnership and excited for the future ahead. So let's dive into it. First question for Heather. You said culture can either be a growth killer or a competitive edge. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Maybe an example from some of your work?
Absolutely. I mean, at Advisa, we've been partnering with organizations and specifically working with leaders for, almost 40 years. And what we've learned in that time is that when the culture of an organization is aligned with the business goals, that it can really fuel the achievement of the goals and the results that the organization is aspiring to achieve. So that, like you said, it can either be an enabler or a killer. We've seen that in many contexts, and I'll highlight maybe 3 examples of clients that we've worked with to help them really get their culture aligned with where they're headed. One is a regional home builder that was acquired and had the opportunity to become a national home builder. And the challenge that they were facing, they had a really wonderful, healthy, engaging culture, regionally, but they were really wrestling with how do we propagate that across the country into all these new locations with different leaders in place and teams. And so we were brought alongside them to really help them diagnose what is the state of leadership and culture today in your organization. And then we were able to design programming to help their leaders really, as I said, propagate or scale the core values of the organization across to the different locations. So it was that diagnosing, and then it was designing the programming, and then delivering those learning experiences was a way to really get everybody on the same page and get leaders in particular aligned with what is it that we're trying to grow, what behaviors and mindsets across the entire enterprise. So that's a pretty powerful story of change and shift that really led to increased productivity and tremendous growth, as well as brand consistency across the different markets. The second example that I would talk about is a 50-year-old family-owned construction contractor. And the challenge they were facing, things were going well. They had some long-time tenured employees, but it was really about growth and getting aligned in terms of the strategy of the business and how a healthy work culture could really power that. So again, we were able to, collect some data up front about where are they. We did some strategic consulting to help them create core values and leader capabilities. And then again, with leaders being the catalyst that can activate and create that intentional culture, we engaged with their leaders across the organization. And, they were able to see huge dollars and cents results from everybody getting on the same page. And interestingly, just coming together to have meetings and talk about the people side of the business and measure and quantify how is our culture changing and growing. So that was a great success story. And then another one is a small community bank. And the challenge they were facing was leadership transition. So going from sort of a dysfunctional, kind of siloed culture to a new leader coming in and saying, we need to crack this open and we need to put a new, stake in the ground that we're going to be a more engaging, open, and highly productive work environment. And so again, helping him make that turn through the coaching, the programming, and the work we were doing with their leaders was a really fun ride.
What I love about those examples, Heather, is these are all companies from different industries, different shapes and sizes. The commonality that I heard that tied it all together on kind of what the intervention points were for your team getting involved was it sounds like these organizations had like a growth mindset. Now, obviously, they're at different points of their journey and different circumstances leading to that growth. But maybe for BJ, like when you're working with leaders and they have these growth mindsets, like how often do they realize that culture is, I don't want to necessarily say it's an issue prohibiting growth, but how often are they recognizing that their culture needs to be unlocked for them to get to that next stage of organizational performance and growth?
Yeah. I mean, if we're fortunate, someone's leading with that. They get the feeling and they have language for it already. Even if they've read a book, we did a book club, or I left a Vistage group or some CEO group. I mean, that's kind of perfect environment because they've already had the mindset shift that this is going to be something that's long ranging and it's going to involve everybody. More often, and Heather might comment on this too, when I walk in, we're somewhere in the middle. If we're too early, they don't even know why they should be having a conversation with a group that focuses on the things like Heather and I are going to chat about just here shortly. They don't even have a language for that. They're really like either right in front of their face or they're in super quantitative, like business result or business. It's just, they're not bringing that people side into it just yet. But in that middle, that's typically where we find people that something is happening here and they're starting to make connections to their people's behavior. I'm seeing themes that I don't like at this regional location or at this plant down in Alabama or here. And now we have something to aim at to draw data from it. Even better, I think I might be the problem. I think things we're doing at this level of leadership is inconsistent. They're starting to see there's at minimum alignment issues, Nick. They're starting to see that there's structurally how we lead, what we even call leadership might need to be addressed because you can't develop something that doesn't have a name or purpose within a business. We're too busy for that stuff. And so that's typically where I meet them in the weeds. And that's where we're working from wherever we find them to start taking those first few steps to developing what they'll call later, sometimes way later. That's when our culture transformed. That was the moment where, unfortunately for Heather and I, we have the luxury of being there for those moments with them, where they're doing the work and they realize, oh, that thing everyone's talking about, that book I read, that's happening for us.
And that's probably such a rewarding moment, is to see that come to light and watch the journey till the very end. I guess it's a continuous journey, but watch it till that aha moment.
For sure.
And there's this phrase that I hear you use a lot. It's your leaders are your culture carriers. And it seems like a common thread in a lot of these stories was leadership. So maybe you can help us understand that phrase a little more, and, what are the implications for executive teams and people managers alike?
Yeah, I mean, we came to that phrase after doing a lot of leadership development without the strategic context. Clients would come to us and they'd say, we need leader development. We need our leaders to learn these skills. And that was all well-intentioned. And anytime an individual leader learns a new skill that's going to help them individually connect with a team member or coach and develop a team member, that is noble in and of itself. But individuals getting development, what we started to learn is that leaders didn't understand their role in actually architecting, or, like you said, picking up and carrying the culture with intention. And when you've got all leaders who understand their role in doing that, and they understand exactly which mindsets and behaviors they need to activate, now you start to go from individual impact to an organizational change. And so we started really leaning into the phrase leaders are culture carriers, because it very succinctly conveys that the onus is on leaders. They are the catalyst, or the axis around which the culture of the organization turns, because what leaders tolerate and celebrate, that is what becomes the norm for how people behave. And, what most people do most of the time is essentially what becomes your culture. So that thinking about carrying the culture, that to pick something up requires intention. And it also implies movement. And, when you dig into the Latin root of the word intention, it's something to the effect of, straining forward, leaning into something with eager anticipation. And so it's that striving and that pushing. When you get leaders who understand, I'm the one who has to, strain forward, almost like, that image of a track meet, and you've got the person who crosses the finish line and breaks the tape, and they lean forward that way. That's what we want our clients, our leaders, to think about. We need you thinking about your role in culture with that kind of intentionality and energy applied toward it. And by the way, that's on top of whatever their day job is, so to speak. Carrying the culture is you're picking that up every day when you come to work, whether that's virtually or in person, and you're carrying around those mindsets and behaviors that you've declared are important to accelerate the achievement of your business goals.
It seems like you're leaning into things in our work where they're getting that recognition. I have to carry the culture, but exactly what's the framework that I'm going to use to even start? I know it's there. I'm reading books and you hear some great things out there, but it's hard to bring to life, in the work that we do. So the acronym we use at Advisa is called ATLAS. This is architected by Heather, and it's actually the backbone of what you're going to hear from Heather and myself as the guide along with the series. So maybe, Heather, we can walk through what that acronym ATLAS stands for, and like why it's even there, what's the order, importance, etc. And then maybe we can give a few reflections about how we brought that to life in the work that we do. And more importantly, the practicalities for who might be listening to this, be they at the executive level organization, supervisory director level, or maybe someone who's in a front line somewhere that's starting to get an inkling that, we need to do something like this within our organization, and how I might start. So are you game?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, Atlas, really this acronym and this framework, if you will, for creating cultural competitive advantage. And I'll define what that means in a moment. But just to set the table, that's born out of everything we've learned over all these years of working with leaders and working with organizations. The lessons learned and the ways, our roots. We started out as a predictive index partner. And so Predictive Index is a software platform that includes a variety of assessments that help companies hire for job fit, coach in a very intentional way, design teams, and really diagnose sources of disengagement so that, and using data and assessments to do that. But we were doing that for many, many years, and that's a best-in-class solution. But again, we were finding that implementing Predictive Index and even the PI training that would come with it only took our clients so far. So we would continually, say, well, what's missing? What are we missing? And that's really what led to our pulling together a point of view where we talk about 5 drivers for creating, like I said, cultural competitive advantage. And that's kind of a mouthful. So what we mean by that is that if your culture is a competitive advantage for you, what that means is your company or your organization has a performance edge, that the way leaders are behaving and the environment that they're creating, that's actually accelerating the achievement of the objectives and strategies that the business has in place. That's the competitive advantage piece. I mean, you've all heard the Drucker quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. The thing is, that's only true when your culture is misaligned. So this framework really gives a language and a way to understand what are the 5 things that need to be in place so that our culture can fuel the achievement of the goals and objectives that are important for us to achieve. So with that backdrop, the first driver is called activation from above. And what we mean by that is that culture is not something that can be delegated off to HR. The executive team has to own and relentlessly pursue the importance of creating a healthy, inclusive, productive work environment. If the executive team is not bought in, and if they are not willing themselves to come along with this culture change journey and the leader development that goes along with it, then it kind of breaks down from there. Next is trust and shared purpose. So, mission, vision, values, those important things need to be made explicit so that culture can enable those things. If the mission, vision, values, if that's cloudy or confusing or people don't understand where the organization is headed and they don't have a crisp and real understanding of the core values, those being alive and well, then it's very difficult for culture to grow in the direction that you want it to grow. So that's the trust and shared purpose. Once those important things are declared and made clear, here's where we're headed, here's what we're about, and here are the core values that represent our corporate character. The next driver is leader effectiveness. Leaders need to know, what am I supposed to say and do around here to be effective carrying those values, activating that culture? So that clarity for leaders, and then very customized development that helps them gain confidence in delivering the mindsets and behaviors. That's super important to that cultural transformation. That's really the tipping point. When leaders start to become effective at picking those values up and coaching and celebrating and holding people accountable for the types of behaviors that will hasten the achievement of our goals, that's when things organizationally start to tip in the right direction. So that's ATL. The second A is actionable people data. So because we've been in the data business for a really long time, we know how powerful it can be when leaders and managers can directly get their hands on information about how their people are wired and motivated, engagement data. That kind of people data is just as important as the financial and operational data that most organizations have been, making available to everyone all the time. We see that people data needs to be in the hands of managers just as much as the financial piece. And then the S, that stands for systems. And you can do everything right in terms of activation from above. And we've got the trust and shared purpose. We've got leaders who understand these are the 3 to 5 capabilities that I'm supposed to display. And I have data about my people to help me know how I'm doing. But if the systems, the software platforms, the norms, the processes and procedures, if any of those systematic things are at odds with the culture we're trying to create, now we have competing priorities, and that will sort of stall that transformation that I was talking about. So all 5 of those drivers, when they're working together, that is really what creates that state of competitive advantage.
Just to share with everybody, when you come to listen to what we're talking about, in all of those areas, Heather and I are going to really dive into the weeds and minutia that hopefully you'll start to connect to your lived experience in your organization. So whatever you're listening, whatever episode you come into down the road, and I'm going to challenge you just in a second here to linger on a couple of these, Heather, and so might Nick and Zach, you're going to find a way out, or there's going to be a rung to grab onto next. The big picture sometimes isn't the hardest part. It's, what do I do now? I'm only me and I'm only here. And how does that work? So I'm going to ask the first question, and Nick and Zach can load yourself up if you want to for Heather. I want to linger on activation from above for a second, because it's the pushback that I get in the field most often. Boy, it'd be great if, and yeah, we're going to try to do this here. And it's this segmented thing where culture's been delegated down and over. But yet we get measured on, along with our counterparts, on this big sweeping thing where we don't have the power, authority, budget, or reach to make that kind of impact. So if someone listening to this is in that spot now, maybe they'll be going to CultureCon, who knows, and they're trying to find a way. What would you share with them when they say, hey, I'm just struggling to get that activation from above, or that mouthpiece or champion at the C team level?
The first thing I would say is what executive teams care about is results. They are responsible for making sure that the organization achieves the goals and objectives, financial and otherwise, that they set a strategy at the beginning of the year, and there are some results that they're accountable to show at the end of the year. And if you can speak the language of that strategy and the results that they are or are not achieving, and the friction and the things that are getting in the way of results, 9 times out of 10, the root cause of some of the things in the middle that create friction between strategy and results, very often it's people issues. It is cultural misalignment. So the way to get the attention of an executive team is to talk in their language, and, don't talk about, I want to talk to you about culture. No, I want to talk to you about the growth goals that we've set and how we can accelerate getting there most profitably. That's a conversation that they want to have. The culture, the different tactics related to how are we going to align our culture with where we're going, that's sort of down the road. But first, you have to get their attention, that you understand at a strategic level what the organization exists to do. And then you've got to position yourself as a catalyst to helping the organization get there better, faster, stronger. The next thing I would say is that objective data is a very powerful persuader. So it's one thing if you're one voice, or maybe even if you're an HR professional listening and, you've got a team of people, what the cultural cost, the toll, if you will, that the organization is taking on because leaders and managers maybe don't know how to activate the right kind of culture. You know the toll that that's taking, but it's hard to just one voice bring that up. But we believe that there is a way you can measure that. In fact, we have a proprietary assessment called the Leader and Culture Assessment. And when you can gather objective information about, first, how effective are our leaders at displaying 16 behaviors that are highly correlated with organizational success and employee engagement. And also when you can measure and organizationally, how well are we attracting and retaining top talent? And then the last part of that assessment is capturing some employee loyalty sentiment, open-ended remarks. When you paint that picture for an executive team to say, this is what people said about our leader effectiveness and how magnetic and effective our culture is. And then you can just sit back and let them tear it apart. Let their strategic brains dig into whatever story that data is telling. So data is also a very effective way to get the attention of the people above you.
I'm wondering too, Heather, you had mentioned that Peter Drucker quote earlier with culture eats strategy for breakfast. And then I once heard a member of our CultureCon community say, yeah, but process eats culture for lunch. And so I'm maybe drawing the wrong conclusion, but I think it's feeding into the S in the Atlas acronym, which is like, if you don't have the right systems in place and the processes and procedures, a lot of this hard fought intentionality and design, it can't come to fruition if there aren't those processes in place to let it come to life and take root. So this is my question for you. Like, when you're talking to clients and prospective clients about the Atlas framework and you're explaining what each one of these acronyms mean, is there one in particular that maybe on the surface feels like a little bit more daunting for an organization to think about, but then once you kind of unpack it a little bit for them, it's more like, oh, okay, yeah, that feels a little bit more like practical and realistic for us?
You know, it depends. What I will say is all 5 of the drivers together is what's daunting. Oh, wow. I think intellectually people understand those 5 drivers and they go, yeah, that totally makes sense. But then the very next thought they have is, and holy cow, that is a lot of work to push that rock up the hill, every day to try to make organizational change. So what we find is we usually just want to pick 1 or 2. Like, where do we want to start? Because to start something, let's chunk off something small and manageable. Sometimes we're working with a predictive index client. So they've already got actionable people data and they've already got a piece of a system. They've got a software platform, at least, in place that managers are using to improve hiring and improve coaching and access that people data. So they've already got the ball rolling on 2 of those 5 drivers. So that's typically what we do. We meet them where they are. Sometimes, though, it is a more strategic start. I mean, the banking example that I talked about earlier and the construction example that I talked about earlier, those engagements actually started with a bit of strategic planning. So trust and shared purpose. Let's revisit the mission, vision, values of the organization as the strategic backdrop for whatever culture and leader development work that we're going to do. So sometimes that's where we start. And, regardless though, eventually, if the organization starts to see the light and they start to see the power that can be accessed when their culture is aligned and their processes support that culture that's aligned with their business goals, when they start to see the light of that, that's when it's exciting, because the executive team starts to get real serious about how do we measure it, how do we hold people accountable, and how do we not take our foot off the gas of this, because the momentum starts to build. And then what we haven't talked about, which perhaps is just obvious, but I feel like I should say it, the other really important benefit of all this is the opportunity for people within these organizations to thrive, the well-being and the purpose that individuals feel when they're cared for and they are a part of a work environment that is inclusive and healthy and that values not only their work output, but also their humanity.
Can I riff off of that real quick?
Yeah.
Heather, you did a great job, but you want to ruin it for them? Send them to the meetings that you typically send them to. Like that's a first process and systems where you think about people, you're like systems, you think of like machinery, like this computer or my phone,
right.
I got to buy this software package. I'm like, let's observe a meeting. When's the last great meeting you had? I'm like, oh, I don't remember. I'm like, when's the last time you hung out with your friends? What'd you all do? What's the last concert you went to? It was just a concert, right? No, you know how to have an engaging meeting. And sometimes when you go in, like, what's the hardest part? Hey, you got to keep this quick and snippy. Like these meetings are only 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, so they're terrible. Because I would never want to go to a 15-minute concert. I would never want to hang out with my friends for just 15 minutes. If I'm doing something, we're human beings, we're tribal. We want to be in engaging places, like all the time. So when they downplay the importance of meetings as this like stale, like rigid information exchange, who's jacked and at their best at that company to dive in and give you their best work? It's structured. It's a system that is poorly built. It doesn't have the framework it needs to do anything like higher level or lower level, and just other than give your people something to make fun of, which is not nothing.
But yeah, we don't want that. No, you're right, BJ. I think those meeting rhythms, the way meetings happen and why they exist, that's another form of a systematic constraint or enabler for the kind of culture that we're trying to create.
Well, and Heather, I know we kind of layer down, we're, a ways in here about our perspective and what we've learned over all of these years and how what's most helpful and what do we see actually getting people on the best places to work, and they're bragging about their culture. What are we learning from all these people? But you built a tool along with the team to actually put this into action, to give some practical starting point, and it's called the Atlas Navigator. So if you could just take a minute to talk about what it is and what kind of impact does it help organizations make?
For sure. Like I said, the all five of the drivers and the work that goes into getting buy-in and commitment at the top and clarifying the important things and designing learning experiences for leaders and delivering that over time. That's a lot. I always giggle when I see people say, culture made simple. This is not simple. This is important, and we have a process and a framework and a language that we can use to do this important work, but it's not simple. And it's for that reason that we found we need a way to boil all this down and give people a way to get a quick snapshot of where are my strengths and where are opportunities for improvement relative to those five drivers. So Atlas Navigator, the word navigate, which way do I go? Where do I start? That's really what it's designed to do. And it's really a 5-minute exercise. So it's, I talked about our big leadership and culture assessment, which is what we use to kick off these engagements. That's a more validated, robust assessment. Navigator is a quick snapshot of where am I doing well and where do we have opportunities to grow across those five drivers. You get immediate results. And what we find is it takes something that's big and complex and kind of scary, and it boils it down to something that's much more manageable and approachable. So if you go to our website, advisa.com, and you'll see right there on the homepage, it says Culture Check. There's a button, you click it. And if anything that we've been chatting about today caught your attention and you're interested in saying, I wonder how we're doing across those drivers, there's 25 short questions and you get some immediate results kicked back to you. And the thing that I love about that is that for whoever it is, whether you're a manager, you're an HR professional, maybe you are a member of the executive team, once you get those results back, now you have something to elevate the conversation. You have a reason to knock on someone's door or hit somebody up on Teams and say, hey, I just did this thing and it's really got me thinking and I'd love to just talk through it with you. Now we're having a different conversation because we can both look at some data, and you can even have that other person, you could have them take Navigator. And now your conversation could be comparing and trading your perspectives on how are we doing across these things. And I think that's what starts to plant the seeds that can be watered as we start to think about making real change.
So if someone's listening and thinking like, this sounds like us, for whatever level of the organization they're in, Heather, and they don't know where to begin, it sounds like Atlas Navigator might be at least part of like step one. What's the next step I can take? Is there anything else that you would share with those folks listening right now as a function of, or like a step one or a step two that you could recommend to them?
Well, I mean, yes, Navigator is a great place to start. The other thing that I always come back to, I mean, we're not doing culture and leader development work just for the sake of culture and leader development. Those things are in service of the business achieving what it sets out to achieve. And I keep coming back to that because another good place to start with all of this is to simply ask the question of whomever, your team, your manager, someone in a different department, how well are we doing? Are we succeeding as a business? And if we're not, what's getting in the way? And like I said earlier, when you start to do some root cause analysis, or you start to try to identify how we can be more effective, almost always there is a people component to the improvement that can be realized. So just simply talking about the performance of the business can be a good place to start. I think then there are also, the places you can look, like what are our employee engagement scores? What is that data telling us? Most organizations are already doing that kind of survey every year. You could also look at, turnover. Are we losing good people? Are we having trouble attracting and finding the talent that we need to grow? So those are other signals. We're not performing at the level we want to be performing. We're losing good people. We're experiencing a lot of conflict and confusion. And in general, people just aren't aligned and rowing in the same direction. Those are all places to start to kind of lift the hood and try to understand what's really going on here at a deeper level.
And I think that's such a good anchoring point for this initial episode, because it just really underscores why we're so excited about this series. There's so much practicality to the models that you've developed. And more than anything, I think it's just the inspiration and the awareness that getting started isn't as daunting as people may think. However, like you said earlier, Heather, this isn't easy work, right? It takes a lot of intentionality and buy-in and design from a lot of different components within an organization. So on behalf of Zach and myself and everyone listening, thank you so much for just laying the groundwork for the Atlas framework and what's to come in this podcast series. And I would just say for the listeners, for the episodes ahead, you're going to hear a lot more about each of these 5 critical drivers, a lot about the real world applications for the Atlas framework, and really more than anything, how to build a culture that provides a competitive advantage, right? So both now and as your organization continues to evolve and grow, this will be an invaluable resource to you. So we couldn't be more excited to go on this journey with you. Thanks so much, Heather and BJ.
Absolutely. It's been great.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of the official CultureCon podcast.
If you got something out of it, share it with a friend, teammate, or fellow culture geek.
And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Until next time.